κέρματα όπως αυτό του 1 ευρώ και χαρτονομίσματα όπως αυτό των 50 ευρώ θα βρίσκονται στο πορτοφόλι μας.
There had been basically for quite some time hardly any crisis prior to the great financial crisis. There was the impression that because of good central bank policies, we had entered a period of Goldilocks economy, no crisis ever again, eternal bliss and happiness.
It is certainly true that before the global financial crisis started back in 2007, there was an open debate, including a cover of The Economist magazine saying, well, is the IMF relevant anymore? Does it have a role internationally? I remember people used to joke that it was the Turkish monetary fund because Turkey was one of the few countries that was borrowing.
Stability forever? Who needs the International Monetary Fund? Nobody does. Markets can regulate all of that by themselves, and all of a sudden, disaster. The then managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, highly intelligent, very dynamic, saw this as the chance to regain a global position for the IMF.
My name is Dominic Strauss-Kahn, and I served as the managing director of the IMF from 2007 to the midst of 2011.
Είμαι η Ελένη Βαρβιτσιώτη.
Είμαι η Βικτόρια Δεμυρινού.
Το 2015 ήμασταν ανταποκρίτριες στις Βρυξέλλες.
Εκεί που όλα κρίθηκαν.
Σήμερα επιστρέφουμε.
Για να καταλάβουμε τι πραγματικά συνέβη.
Κυνηγήσαμε τις πληροφορίες.
Μιλήσαμε με τους πρωταγωνιστές.
Καταγράψαμε το παρασκήνιο.
Ήταν η πιο δραματική στιγμή στην ιστορία της Ευρωζώνης.
Πόσο κοντά φτάσαμε στην καταστροφή? So when the subprime crisis hit, were you looking at all at Europe? Were you looking at all at Greece?
Maybe I need to explain a little how it works. I like to use a bad analogy, which is to say that the IMF is a doctor, not a cop. What does that mean? It means that IMF is not knocking the door saying, I want to come and do something with you. IMF is waiting for people, for the country, asking them to come. I remember the call. Hey, I knew George Papandreou for a long time, and I told him, okay, we're here for help, but, well, you know, there's the problem is that you're within a monetary union, so you cannot move alone.
You had Dominic Strauss-Kahn, French, with political ambitions, would like to get his hands stuck back into Europe. It is also why they were founded. Are they going to really leave us out of one of the biggest sovereign bailouts in global history?
Well, Frankly, no European member was really in favor of having the IMF on board. They believed that it was a local business, they will manage, they can do it.
Even in the German capital, in Berlin, opinions were divided. Initially, Wolfgang Schäuble was against a participation of the International Monetary Fund, arguing that this is a European problem and we're strong enough to solve it by ourselves.
I think if you're in a crisis situation, particularly if you need market credibility, who had credibility with the markets? The IMF had done this everywhere. It had done it in Argentina, had done it, in Britain, had done it everywhere. Why would you cut out the only organization that had the expertise and the market credibility to do something like that?
Quite pragmatically, a few of us in Europe had the experience of running a country program along the lines that the IMF has been doing for the last 60, 70 years.
So was there a strong internal debate about doing it or not?
Yeah, I think there was an internal debate, but as I said, I think the prevailing view was this is not just about Greece, this is about the Eurozone as a whole, it's about contagion, it's about trying to stop a series of dominoes from falling that might start with Greece and then go to Portugal and then go to Spain and then end up with Italy, and that this could be a huge problem.
I really believe that without the IMF, the whole system would have been just incredible and would have collapsed.
One precondition for the IMF up to that point to participate in a reform program is to turn the country's debt sustainable. And was the Greek debt sustainable at that time?
That's the big question of sustainability.
Do you think Greek debt was sustainable at the time?
Frankly, I think no. And I think people inside the IMF were very aware of the fact that it was probably not sustainable.
The debt sustainability in the developed country is much more complicated because it's not just a question of figures. It's a question of trust. Will financial market react positively or not to the measures which are taken? We just don't know exactly.
In American view, you were wrong, I were wrong. Let's restructure the debt. Which means you have X amount of debt, let's just cut in half. You take half of it, I take half of it, and there's more sustainable route. Now, the problem the Germans would say and the French would say is, ooh, who owns that debt? Turned out there was a lot of German banks and French banks that owned it. And they said, ooh, don't do that. You're gonna ruin my French and German banks.
We have to remind that we were at this time in 2010 in the aftermath of the big subprime crisis. Most economic and political leaders around the world feared that the crisis could be as big as the crisis in 1929, with millions of unemployed people, with business collapsing. One of the biggest mistakes in 1929 was not to save the banks, not to let the financial system collapse.
People keep referring that, the debt restructuring did not happen in Greece to save the European banks, French, German, whatever banks you want to call them. What is your take?
I would say yes and no. Yes, because at this time, the question of the survival of many banks was at stake. Keep in mind that the amount needed of recapitalization of the bank all around the world was $1,000 billion, $1 trillion. And 6 months later, we produced a second report, and the second report said, no, we were wrong. It's not $1 trillion, it's $2 trillion, which is needed just to stabilize the capital of the bank and avoid financial collapse.
So this was incredibly selfish, incredibly political. I think the fact that the IMF was forced to break its own rules was partially the fault of Dominique Strauss-Kahn, because he wanted to get involved, but more I put the blame on the Germans and the French, because they wanted to protect their darling banks. So it was a bank bailout and not a sovereign bailout. And that basically put German banks above the Greek people.
Against this background, yes, the question of saving the bank was a huge question, not especially the French or the German banks. The European bank, the American banks, the banks in Japan, the banks in Korea, all over the world. And so the problem was not to save the bank for saving the bank. The problem was to save the bank, to save the people.
But economists and analysts are saying that, if there was a debt restructuring at the beginning, the program would not have been so harsh and hard.
Sure. If a restructuring at the beginning would have been possible, the program would have been easier. There was no magic stick to get out of the problem without a phase of austerity. What is right in what you say is that with the earlier the restructuring, the softer the program. But early restructuring had other risks, and all the people deciding it, especially the European leaders, had to balance the two risks: longer, harsher program or bigger risk on the other side.
But some say that the first program was very bad designed in a sense that it asked for very big reforms in a very small period of time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it was probably too difficult for this time. Let me share the responsibility. I think the IMF asked for reform in a period of time which was too short. At the same time, I think the reform took too much time in Greece and could have been done earlier. The second mistake that we made, we the IMF and the other partners, European Union, ECB, along with us, is that we underestimate the strengths with which the Greek economy will react. And the shock, the negative shock on the Greek economy was stronger than expected. And that's one of the reasons it has been so long. And certainly it has been a technical but important mistake in the programs.
Can we do a handshake out? Yeah, of course. George, come on, let's come in my office with you. How are you?
Fine. Good.
Not too tired?
No. Perfect.
Take this.
Yes. Your comments.
Hello.
How are you?
You're excellent. Very well, outside.
Everything we can have to go.
No, but you maybe.
What did you have inside?
But I remember, it was
intense, right?
yeah, the press coverage was, thank you, was extensive, and it seemed as though everyone was hanging on, is Paul Thompson coming or not,
Don't talk about Paul Thompson. This
I
is
know, it's a
we
bad word.
we had an interview with him tomorrow.
Oh, really?
And he texted, 5 days ago?
He canceled?
Well, he said, I don't want to talk on the record.
Really? Even now?
Well,
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of blame to go around. They're definitely one of the actors.
part of the reason of doing this that many years later is like the lessons learned angle and the reflections.
I understand. I think it's important to reflect on crisis. I've had nothing but crisis after crisis in my career, so.
Then you had Ukraine and the whole section.
Yeah, and it's still going. I shared quite openly that it seemed, just to be completely blunt in retrospect, it seemed illiterate to expect a country to run 4.5% primary surpluses almost endlessly. too much upfront fiscal austerity with no endpoint. I can't remember exactly for how long, but there was no precedent for running that type of fiscal austerity in a democracy, particularly in the context of a fragile recovery.
Πήραμε μέτρα, 14 δισεκατομμύρια, τα μισά ήταν φορολογικά, τα άλλα μισά ήταν μείωση δαπανών.
Actually, in the middle of 2014, things were looking up for Greece. A very small recovery was starting to get underway. The deficit, which had been above 9% in 2012, was actually falling close to 3%, and also Greece had achieved a position of primary surplus. So it was a remarkable turnaround in a short space of time.
Είχαμε βγει στις αγορές, θυμίζω, είχαμε πρωτογενές πλεόνασμα.
We were actually forecasting at the time that Greece would grow by 3% of GDP in 2015.
Πηγαίναμε αρκετά καλά.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, είναι σε ένα βρασμό η πολιτική σκηνή μετά το χθεσινό αποτέλεσμα των ευρωεκλογών που δίνει προβάδισμα 3,9 μονάδων στο ΣΥΡΙΖΑ.
Εγώ θυμάμαι τότε ο Μισελ Μπαρνιέ, που ήταν επίτροπος, με πήρε στο τηλέφωνο και μου είπε συγχαρητήρια με τόσα σκληρά μέτρα. Του λέω να το πείτε στον Πρωθυπουργό αυτό.
After the European elections in summer 2014, the appetite for the Samaras government to go the last mile was reduced, which I still find a pity because I think Greece could have spared itself to say return back to a deeper crisis, which we have seen then in 2015.
Third quarter of this year in the Eurozone, Greece had the fastest growing economy with the highest structural surplus. This spectacular comeback is due to an unprecedented sacrifice of all the Greek people.
In the second half of 2014, situation was looking better. But then the Greek government at the time got into an election mode, and there were slippages, benchmarks were not met, conditionality was not met, so disbursements did not happen.
In the summer and fall of 2014, emotions had taken over. We weren't having an economic discussion anymore. It was about the degree to which the IMF and Minister Schäuble and other authorities, lenders to Greece, creditors, had trust that Greece could be counted on to deliver reforms without additional pressure, without more discipline. That was the word that we would hear in Berlin. And so what the IMF could have done and what we asked them to do into the late summer, early fall, was instead of giving Greece 100+ structural reforms that you insist upon as the price of credibility, give the leadership of Greece a prioritized, a streamlined list of structural reforms that will have the greatest benefit in terms of lifting the binding constraints on Greece's growth, which are also the most politically achievable. You know, I kind of floated alternatives.
And what was their reaction?
You're a fool. You're being played.
Who said that, the IMF?
More the IMF than the Europeans, but certainly from the fund. That, don't you think we've thought of this? Don't you think that we've considered that possibility? And what makes you think that they're going to deliver any more for you in this plan than they have for us? Don't be naive.
It was a little bit puzzling to us that we were not able to be more successful with the IMF, but there was such a deep history of promises and promises not kept that there was a demand for more than, frankly, I thought at the time was feasible in terms of the domestic situation in Greece.
It had become personal for everyone. How could it not be? When Greece had so visibly suffered as much as it was. I mean, I saw it the moment I landed. Anyone could. It's, of course, then personal for everyone in Greece when the IMF is imposing conditions that make the situation even more difficult.
Christine Lagarde, who had been a French finance minister, she understood very well about Greece. The requirements to be, let's say, a bit more flexible.
Bonjour, Madame Lagarde. Bonjour, Madame Lagarde. Bonjour.
Let's just have a quick word on Greece.
Oh, it's always a pleasure having a quick word with you.
Thank you.
Well, Greece has done an awful lot of work and has showed some real resolve. So it's now for the creditors to do the same. And certainly the IMF will, as always, play its part. And we are in for not a quick fix, but a real fix.
But there was a guy named Paul Thompson who was in charge. And he always came and he was there in the meetings when she was not present. And he was very, very, very tough.
Είχε διαταραχθεί η εμπιστοσύνη μεταξύ του επικεφαλής του Διεθνούς Νομισματικού Ταμείου, που ήταν στο έδαφος στην Ελλάδα τότε, του Πολ Τόμψον και των ελληνικών αρχών. Και πιστέψτε με, προσπαθώ να είμαι δίκαιος μαζί του.
I would go as far as saying that Greece has not been doing well. Despite we have had more than 30 technical assistance missions the last 18 months.
So I think that was something that was a kind of a crusade, a personal crusade. He was a nice guy, we could discuss with him, etc. But then when he came to Greece, bam, he was totally rigid and brutal.
I do not agree that the first memorandum did not focus on reform. I think the first memorandum focused primarily on reforms, but they were not implemented as expected.
She had great confidence in him. He is an amazingly intelligent economist who had worked on crises for most of his career. But, you know, the truth is at times he attracted a lot of criticism and there was a lot of personal animosity towards him. And, you know, a lot of people in Greece would insult him by name and threaten him by name. I don't think he ever really took that on too seriously in his work. It may have affected him personally.
Ο Τόμψον είχε υπερβεί το ρόλο του κατά πολύ. Πίστευε ότι το ελληνικό πολιτικό σύστημα δεν μπορεί να αντέξει την πειθαρχία του ευρώ.
This year shows the relative unit labor cost of Greece relative to the Eurozone. And you can see that the relative unit labor costs are still very, very high. They need to be reduced by another 15%.
Άρα δεν μπορεί να μείνει στο ευρώ. Και προσπαθούσε να επηρεάσει και τη γερμανική κυβέρνηση προς την κατεύθυνση αυτή. Αυτή είναι μια δική μου υπόθεση.
And how close was he with Wolfgang Schäuble? Some say that Dr. Schäuble really trusted him.
He trusted him, I trusted him. It sometimes happened that the minister really wanted to reach out to Paul Thompson to call him and to ask him about an element, an adjustment program. That was quite normal.
There was a sense that Schäuble felt like if Thompson said something was done, then it was really done. And I don't think he felt that was always true of the Greeks or even of the Commission.
Greece must continue to bring down its deficit. There's no way around it. There's no way around bringing down the deficit. Already, Greece is receiving support from the EC, the Commission, the ECB, the IMF, far, far, far beyond what we are doing to any other country.
Θεωρώ ένα από τα μεγαλύτερα λάθη που έκανε η Λαγκάρντ είναι όταν έκανε το Τόμψον υπεύθυνο της Ευρώπης του Δουνουτού. Ο Τόμψον ερχότανε με συγκεκριμένες απόψεις από τα πρώτα δύο μνημόνια, ήθελε να δικαιολογήσει τη θέση του σε αυτό, ήταν απολύτως πολιτικός, ήθελε να εφαρμόσει ένα πρόγραμμα, δεν τον ένοιαζε ούτε η αλήθεια, ούτε τα οικονομικά στοιχεία.
There's no doubt also that there's a realization that Greece will take a decade or longer to fully deal with this problem. There's no doubt about that. It will take a long time.
The IMF said we have to bring this country back to the markets as soon as possible with sustainable debt, etc., etc. The colleagues from the European Commission, good economists, were under the mandate to ensure that Greece was helped and stayed within the euro area.
I think that there was a perception that the Europeans were always willing, for perhaps political reasons, to say this condition was met when we didn't think it was met. And so there's this tension there between the institutions.
So there was this personal difference, hate even amongst certain actors.
Σε τι βαθμό σας δυσκόλευε ότι δεν φαίνονταν να υπάρχει και σύγκληση από τη μεριά των δανειστών των ίδιων μεταξύ τους?
Ναι, όταν μου λένε ότι η ελληνική κυβέρνηση δεν είχε κεντρική θέση και άλλο λέγανε τα διάφοροι υπουργοί σε αυτό, πρέπει να σας πω μπροστά στο θεσμόν ήμασταν υπόδειγμα ενότητας και συνοχής. Είχαμε 3 θεσμοί. Ο Ντέκλεν Κοστέλο μου είχε πει ότι για κάθε ώρα που διαπραγματεύεται με μένα χρειάζεται 4 ώρες να διαπραγματευτεί με τη δικιά του ομάδα.
It was actually a tension and an unresolved discussion between the IMF and the euro area countries, the creditors. And the tension was over the burden sharing. Who would pay?
Looking at the IMF, their lending terms are completely different from what we agreed over time in Europe. So we get the lowest possible interest rate and we pass that on to the borrowing country, while the IMF, and that was agreed among all its members, charges much, much higher interest rates. And the IMF made several billion euro profits with the Greek program. They always make profits with their lending. ESM doesn't make profits.
What does several billion mean?
The number I've seen is $5 billion in profits from the Greek lending operations.
How much is it in terms of the IMF's operations, for example?
That covers 5 years of the operational budget of the IMF.
Plan B for 2011-2012, it was written for Germany. When we come to 2015, the Plan B was written for Greece.
If ever it happened, we have to be prepared.
Ένα σενάριο εφιαλτικό. In 2012, it became quite apparent that our program wasn't solving the Greek problems. So it was seen as not inconceivable that Greece would, one way or the other, leave the euro area, either being pushed out by certain member states or by accident.
There were many people who were involved in creating monetary union, and we never thought about how to organize a way out of the monetary union. We realized very quickly how tremendous the implications would be for the country concerned.
So we met in enormous secrecy, small group of knowledgeable people from the IMF and the ECB and the Commission, and we worked out in huge detail what would everybody have to do if and when Greece were to leave the euro area. It was in such detail that we even knew who would have to send military cargo planes to Greece to pick up stranded tourists. At that time we called it, as camouflage, we called it, I think, Croatian accession.
Όταν πήγα στο Βερολίνο για να δω τη Μέρκελ, σε εκείνο και το ταξίδι, θα θυμάστε που δεν έπρεπε για το μάτι μου να πάω κτλ. Αφού έγινε η συζήτηση με τη Μέρκελ, το Στουρνάρα, ο καθένας με τους επιτελείς του, μου λέει να σου πω 2 πράγματα στο γραφείο μου. Και καθόμαστε και είχε κάτι διαφάνειες που απεικόνιζαν τμηματικά τα προβλήματα της ελληνικής οικονομίας, ελλείμματα, χρέος, ΑΕΠ. Και αφού μου έδειξε ότι έχει πλήρη γνώση της αρρώστιας που έχουμε, μου λέει, κοίταξε, θέλω να σου πω κάτι το οποίο θέλω να το ξέρεις από τώρα. Το ταξίδι που έχεις να κάνεις είναι πολύ δύσκολο. Εάν θέλεις να βγει η Ελλάδα από το ευρώ, τότε να ξέρεις ότι εμείς έχουμε ένα δεύτερο πλάνο να σας βοηθήσουμε. Σταματάω άμεσα, της λέω αυτή την κουβέντα δεν την κάνουμε, δεν υπάρχει, δεν το δέχομαι, δεν υπάρχει ποτέ περίπτωση να δεχτώ να βγει η Ελλάδα από το ευρώ. Αυτό ξεχάστε το.
So in 2012, the fallout of a Greek exit from the euro area would have required huge sums of precautionary lending to member states which might have come under doubt. And our calculation was that this would have required contingency credits of up to 1 trillion euro.
Did we have the 1 trillion euro back in 2012?
Well, back in 2012, we had lots of money. We had set up the safety nets of the euro area, but 1 trillion euro we definitely did not have at our disposal. And I traveled with my analysis of what the fallout of a Greek exit would be. And the very last person I talked to on these issues was Wolfgang Schäuble. And I had a long discussion with him in a hotel room in Tokyo, where I presented the results of our analysis. At the end of my presentation and our discussion, he said, "Are you really convinced of what you're saying?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Okay."
The Plan B for 2011-2012, it was written for Germany. It was not written for Greece. It was actually to show the repercussions of a possible exit of Greece from the Eurozone that would have for the whole system. So that was actually to convince already Wolfgang Schäuble at the time not to undertake that path.
A day or two later, he gave a speech in Singapore, and when I read the transcript, I thought, this month I've earned my salary, because the transcript said that he strongly believes in the future of Greece in the euro area.
Now, when we come to 2015, the Plan B was written for Greece.
I asked for this in 2015. You could not exclude the possibility to see Greece being excluded from the euro area. I was always strongly opposing that view, but nevertheless I said to myself, if ever it happened, we have to be prepared.
Δίνεται εντολή από τον πρόεδρο Juncker να ετοιμαστεί ένα συνολικό, συνεκτικό πλαίσιο για αυτό το ενδεχόμενο, το οποίο έμεινε γνωστό ως Plan B, και στο οποίο περιγραφόταν με αναλυτικό βαθμό λεπτομέρειας όλες οι συνέπειες, όχι μόνο στην οικονομία, αλλά στην ιατροφαρμακευτική περίθαλψη, στην ενέργεια, στους διασυνοριακούς ελέγχους. Ένα σενάριο εφιαλτικό.
And the big difference between 2012 and 2015 in our perception was that in 2012, the Greek government, as a huge majority of the Greek population, very definitely wanted to be part of the euro area. They even more definitely wanted to be part of the European Union, whereas in 2015, we had increasing doubts. Does the government really want to be where they are?
Πόσοι από το κόμμα σας ενστερνιζόντουσαν αυτή την άποψη?
Το 2014 ήμασταν γύρω στο 33%.
Εντάξει, εγώ
Δεν πίστευα ότι μπορούσαν να γίνουν ηγεμονικές αυτές τις θέσεις, είτε στην Ελλάδα, όπου το 70-80% του κόσμου είναι σταθερά υπέρ του ευρώ.
Εσείς όμως είχατε σκεφτεί καλά την έξοδο από το ευρώ. Καταλαβαίνετε τι ρίσκο αυτό θα ήταν για τη χώρα.
Βεβαίως θα ήταν κάποιο ρίσκο. Δεν μπορεί να κάνεις τίποτα πια. Και η Επανάσταση του 21, το λέω λίγο τραβηγμένα, ρίσκο είχε. Και είχε και συνέπειες. Οτιδήποτε αλλάζει απότομα σε μια πορεία μιας χώρας παίρνει μια α, β, γ αναταραχή.
Και το πιο σημαντικό απ' όλα είναι ότι δεν είχε και η Ευρώπη τέτοιο σχέδιο ρεαλιστικό. Δηλαδή, η μελέτη την οποία προσπάθησαν να κάνουν δεν ολοκληρώθηκε ποτέ και τα συμπεράσματά του ήταν αδύνατο να εκτιμηθούν οι συνέπειες.
Μπορείτε να μας εξηγήσετε τι θα σήμαινε μία έξοδος της Ελλάδας από την Ευρωζώνη?
Θα ήταν μια καταστροφή. Το έχω περιγράψει γλαφυρά, ούτε να αγοράσουμε πετρέλαιο και τα πολεμικά μας πλοία στο Αιγαίο. Τώρα, αν θέλετε λεπτομέρειες, πείνα θα υπήρχε. Σε μια διαδικασία που θα επαναδιαπραγματευόμαστε εκατομμύρια συμβόλαια ιδιωτικών επιχειρήσεων, ποιος θα εισήγαγε προϊόντα, από ποιον προμηθευτή, ποιος Έλληνας θα πήγαινε και στο εξωτερικό και θα δεχόντουσαν τις κάρτες του. Δηλαδή είναι τόσο απλά πράγματα αυτά.
Όπως ξέρετε, ως οικονομολόγος ήμουν γνωστό και φανατικός της ιδέας ότι δεν γίνονται αυτά τα πράγματα. Δεν φεύγει μια χώρα από το ευρώ, δεν χρεοκοπεί μια χώρα εντός του ευρώ, άρα υπάρχει βάση για να...
Δεν γίνεται, δεν είναι πιθανό ή δεν είναι δυνατό ή θα βρεθεί μια λύση?
Νομίζω ότι θα βρεθεί λύση οπωσδήποτε.
Για ποιο λόγο?
Διότι δεν υπήρχε άλλη λύση.
Θεωρητικά
Plan B, δηλαδή δεν υπήρχε, ούτε μπορούσε να υπάρξει.
So what you see here is our beekeeping equipment, the drinks, and remnants of my past. This, let me see, I haven't taken this down in some years. So, what does it say? Greece, Plan B.
Have it all in there.
Is this a paper from a...
It's from a restaurant.
From a restaurant?
Yeah. I was explaining to some Greek politician in a restaurant how you default and go bankrupt.
No.
Yeah.
But you kept it, not the Greek politician, which is kind of worrying.
Yeah.
Do you remember who?
Development also corporate. This is like for humanitarian.
Yeah. What does it say here?
Work stream for an exit. Introduction of a new currency.
Sure.
Where's the title, the Albanian?
The front page.
Albanian contingency analysis and plan.
I have to admit that came from me, and this comes from one of my favorite movies, which is To Wag the Dog, where a president starts a fictitious war in Albania as a detraction to the general public. So I thought Albania as a detraction would do the trick here.
At that stage, it was our Dutch friend Martin Verwey, who at that point was Deputy Director General in the Commission, and he's Director General now, and probably one of the most clever people that I've seen come out of a national administration.
How many pages is it? Can you tell us?
I have 139.
Do you want to talk us through the table of contents? Or the most important moments?
Well, here, chapter 1, immediate implications of a non-payment. so the default by Greece. Chapter 2, managing exit. Chapter 3, restrictive measures and capital controls.
How did you keep this Plan B secret?
None of us had any desire to be in the limelight of anything, and we all had the feeling that we were working for the good of Greece and for the good of Europe, and therefore keeping everything discreet, quiet, and confidential was of the essence.
Clear that once you acknowledge that Plan B is there, it means typically that you seriously consider that something bad may happen, and that leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Did you exchange emails or would you meet physically?
Email. Exchanging emails on these issues is a no-no. We just put things on paper in our standalone computers, and when we met, we exchanged the papers. That's the 2015.
So it's pretty analytical.
Yeah. Lots of work, clever people.
Εσείς γνωρίζατε την ύπαρξη αυτού του σχεδίου Β?
Δυστυχώς τη γνώριζα. Και από τη στιγμή που τη γνώριζα, βάρυνα ακόμα περισσότερο. Μάλιστα ήξερα και την αίθουσα στην οποία συνεδρίαζε η ομάδα που την ετοίμαζε και αποφάσισα με τον εαυτό μου να μην περάσω ούτε απ' έξω.
Here we map out a whole chain of events which ultimately leads to Greece introducing emergency legislation to swap all deposits into new drachmas. We would expect a massive devaluation of that new currency, which for a country that is heavily dependent on imports is highly problematic.
Can you explain what kind of devaluation we're talking about?
Yeah, we contemplated a devaluation in the range of 60 to 80%.
And it would be a 60 to 80% devaluation overnight, basically.
Yeah.
Is there precedent historically there?
It has happened in the past, but you need to go to situations like in Argentina with all the consequences that we have seen.
If you devalue to such a huge extent, you have to pay twice as much money in drachma for imported pharmaceuticals. Every single Japanese car that you might import gets twice as expensive. Every bit of military equipment you're buying from the Americans gets twice as expensive.
What about the value of the debt?
But that could have gone to 500-600% of GDP and would not be sustainable.
So savings massacred, employment lost, pension payments under doubt. It would have been not only economic, but a social and therefore societal disaster.
So in 2015, the Eurozone could survive a Grexit?
Yes, absolutely. In 2015, because the other countries had done their homework, they had adjusted, there would have been no contagion if Grexit had happened. So it was only Greece.
Ένα επιχείρημα όμως που ακούμε συχνά είναι ότι μία έξοδος της Ελλάδας το 2012 από το ευρώ, που ήταν η πρώτη φορά που συντάχθηκε αυτό το πλάνο, θα ήταν αδύνατο για την Ευρωζώνη να διαχειριστεί. Ενώ το 2015 είχαν μπει πάρα πολλοί μηχανισμοί, είχαν προστατευτεί άλλες χώρες.
Πιο διαχειρίσιμο εφόσον είχε φύγει ο πολύ μεγάλος κίνδυνος των ευρωπαϊκών τραπεζών που είχαν πουλήσει τα ευρωπαϊκά ομόλογα. Αυτό ισχύει μέχρι εκεί. Από εκεί και πέρα όμως η έξοδος από το ευρώ έχει πάρα πολλές άλλες συνέπειες πέρα από το τραπεζικό σύστημα.
And in parallel work stream in the Commission, the colleagues were also working on a humanitarian package could be adopted quickly to mobilize more humanitarian support for Greek citizens.
Can you explain us how do you print a new currency? What does it take?
Printing a new currency is easy. You need machines, paper, and paint. And off you go.
To print a new stock of money, our assessment at the time was that would take about 8 or 9 months. Long time. So the question was really, okay, what do you do in the interim? So we considered a number of options, and one of the options was to use existing banknotes, but either to stamp them or punch holes in them and use them as the new currency.
Μετά την επέκταση που γίνονται διαπραγματεύσεις και δεν οδηγούν πουθενά, εσείς είχατε αρχίσει να συζητάτε την εκπόνηση ενός σχεδίου Β εξόδου από το ευρώ?
Όποτε άνοιγε τέτοια συζήτηση, άνοιγα εγώ τέτοια συζήτηση, η συζήτηση κατέληγε σε διαπληκτισμούς, φασαρία και διακοπή συνεδριάσεων.
Πάρα πολλές φορές το να διεκδικείς έχει και αυτοδιακινδύνευση, έχει φυσικά τεράστια προσπάθεια που δεν έγινε τότε. Δεν έγινε τότε και αυτό είναι μεγάλο αμάρτημα.
Εγώ μόνος μου, μαζί με το αριστερό ρεύμα, δεν είχα τις τεχνικές δυνατότητες, τις τεχνικο-οικονομικές δυνατότητες να καταρτήσω ένα λεπτομερές σχέδιο, ας πούμε, εξόδου από το ευρώ.
Who would be most hurt by a Greek exit from the Eurozone?
The people of Greece, evidently. Typically, the more vulnerable are always hurt harder than the rich and the powerful. In the end, is perhaps the irony of the whole situation that what started as a disagreement on the program could end very well again in Greece being in the program.
This meeting is now being recorded.
But let me be very specific and very precise on this. The Prime Minister, before he became Prime Minister, and before we won the election in January, had given me the green light to come up with a Plan B.
Για το παράλληλο νόμισμα, εσείς είχατε ενημερωθεί, είχε γίνει κάποια συζήτηση?
Είχε γίνει μια συζήτηση, αλλά ήταν πολύ επιδερμική.
Θυμάστε πότε?
Όχι, δεν θυμάμαι ακριβώς πότε, αλλά θυμάμαι ένα πλάνο πάρα πολύ πρόχειρο με το οποίο συζητούσε ο Βαρουφάκης.
Το οποίο πώς σας φάνηκε?
Δεν, καμία βαρύτητα νομίζω δεν είχε.
I assembled a very able team, a small team as it had to be, because that had to be kept completely under wraps for obvious reasons. And we've been working since the end of December, beginning of January on creating one.
The Prime Minister asked, is there such a thing that actually works? And that conversation was bilateral. I was not involved in that. My name is Glenn Kim, and I served as Senior Financial Advisor to the Hellenic Republic.
Mr. Varoufakis, in this recording that he had this call in with OMFIF back in the day, that he had moved quite significantly in designing that kind of program.
Yeah, he worked on it largely. He requested input. He wanted views, he wanted ideas, he wanted refutations, he wanted to know what's wrong with the idea, which I happily shared.
The work was more or less complete. We did have a Plan B, but the difficulty was to go from the 5 people who were planning it to the 1,000 people that would have to implement it. For that, I had to receive another authorization, which never came.
Στο διάστημα αυτό που μιλούσατε και με τον κύριο Βαρουφάκη και όλοι μαζί συντονιζόσασταν, υπήρξε ποτέ κάποια συζήτηση για παράλληλο νόμισμα ή παράλληλο σύστημα πληρωμών?
Μια φευγαλέα 3 λεπτών ή 5 λεπτών μπορώ να ανακαλέσω προφορική και αν έχει ιδιαίτερη σημασία.
Όπου τι υπόθηκε?
Όπου ο Γιάννης είπε, τότε Απρίλης ήταν, δεν θυμάμαι το, είπε μια ιδέα για ένα IOU προφορικά, αλλά τον κατατρόπωσε το οικονομική ομάδα, υποθέτω. Δεν τους άρεσε η ιδέα.
Εσείς είχατε κάποια αίσθηση ότι προετοιμαζόταν η χώρα για παράλληλο νόμισμα?
Ναι. Βεβαίως. Είχα προειδοποίηση από στέλεχος τότε του επιτελείου ότι ετοιμάζανε παράλληλο νόμισμα.
The General Secretariat of Public Revenues within my ministry is controlled fully and directly by the Troika. The General Secretariat of Information Systems, on the other hand, was controlled by me. And I appointed a good friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine. So I authorized him, and you can't tell anyone that, this is totally between us, to hack.
I'll send the others listening, yes, but they will not send it to their friends.
I know. And even if they do, I will refuse, I'll deny I said it. So we decided to hack into my ministry's own software program in order to be able to bring it all to just copy the code of the tax system's website.
Συγκάλεσα συνταγματολόγους να δω πώς μπορούμε τι χρειάζεται στη Βουλή, αν αυτό μπορεί να περάσει με απλή πλειοψηφία, με ενισχυμένη πλειοψηφία. Δίστανται οι απόψεις, τουλάχιστον εγώ κατάλαβα, είναι ότι δυστυχώς μπορεί να περάσει με απλή πλειοψηφία. Άρα το πρόβλημα ήταν σοβαρό.
I took the position that this would be very difficult to do in any format. Okay? And it would require acknowledgement from a whole lot of people that this is something that would have to be done.
That would have created a parallel banking system while the banks were shut as a result of the ECB's aggressive action to give us some breathing space. This was very well developed.
Whilst one can go through tons of different iterations of how a parallel currency might emerge, the practical circumstances is implementation would require tremendous amounts of input, and execution has to be nearly perfect.
And I think it would have made a very big difference because very soon we could have extended it using apps on smartphones, and it would become a functional parallel system.
And so my point was ultimately, while we can talk about it on a two-dimensional piece of paper, the third dimension of implementation would be fraught with mistakes, and those mistakes could very well lead to serious harm.
And then, of course, this would be euro-denominated, but at the drop of a hat, it could be converted to a new drachma.
Τώρα, εάν αυτό ήταν μία απειλή ή αν ήταν ουσία, το χέρι μου στη φωτιά δεν μπορώ να το βάλω. Ότι όμως ορισμένοι μιλούσαν ανοιχτά για παράλληλο νόμισμα και σε μένα ανοιχτά. Ο κύριος Δραγασάκης, θυμάμαι, μου είχε στείλει τον κύριο Γιώργο Παπαδημητρίου να με ρωτήσει εάν μπορούμε παράλληλα με το ευρώ να κυκλοφορήσει και ένα παράλληλο νόμισμα. Μα αυτό είναι παραλογισμός. Αυτό είναι παράνομο. Αυτό μας οδηγεί εκτός ευρώ. Αυτόματα.
Θυμάμαι ότι είχαμε δημιουργήσει συνθήκες έτσι απόλυτης εκστρατείας.
I had read in the papers that he was a communist.
The deal was that close. It was unreasonable not to try to bridge the last remaining 380 million.
And we were all exhausted at that stage. We had constantly been trying to produce a document that set out the details of a program that Greece should be applying for.
And it was time to come to a decision. So it was organized on the 13th floor of the Berlimo. This is where the offices of the President Juncker of the Commission are.
So the negotiations moved up to sort of the top notch. We had Christine there, Christine Lagarde, Mario Draghi. Juncker was there part of the time, and a number of ministers from the Greek side.
I recall Prime Minister Tsipras was there, Nikos Papas was there.
Θυμάμαι ότι είχαμε δημιουργήσει συνθήκες έτσι απόλυτης εκστρατείας στρατιωτικής. Σε μια μεγάλη αίθουσα ήταν οι principals, δηλαδή οι επικεφαλείς. Σε μια άλλη αίθουσα δίπλα οι σύμβουλοι. και υπήρχε και ένας κοινός χώρος στον οποίο ήταν οι αντιπροσωπείες που αλληλοεπιδρούσαν με τις δύο αίθουσες. Πρέπει να σας πω ότι εκείνες τις ώρες πάλι αισθάνθηκα αισιόδοξος. Είπα, δεν μπορεί όλο αυτό να μην καταλήξει στη σωστή λύση.
What did you think it signified about the severity of the situation?
Greece was on the verge of the expiry of the program. It was clear if an agreement was not going to be made that night or in the immediate days afterwards, expiry of the program, default and Brexit were a real risk.
Υπήρχε μια αίσθηση ότι οι στιγμές πια ήταν ιστορικές, γιατί ήταν το τέλος του προγράμματος. Ήμασταν πια, βλέπαμε την Άβυσσο αν δεν ήμασταν οι μισοί έξω.
How unusual is it to have the heads of the IMF and the ECB sit down and negotiate line by line these kinds of reforms?
I don't think it ever happened before. Of course, they would have signed off on important agreements, but to sit through line by line drafting commitments of a very detailed nature, I don't think this ever happened before.
We made a lot of progress on big issues and got stuck on small issues. I can vividly remember the VAT on the islands closest to Turkey.
By far, the most difficult discussions were on the size of the fiscal package, where I think initially there was a lot of resistance and reluctance to move on the part of Prime Minister Tsipras. There was also, I think, a lot of concern expressed, particularly on the labour market reforms, collective bargaining, and, of course, on pensions.
And it showed we were really at the limit of the physical capacity of everybody, of patience, certainly. And to keep this together, I think we have people like Mario Draghi and Jean-Claude Juncker. They were not the youngest, and they were sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning with, I think, a cup of coffee, a bit of water.
Μας δίνετε λίγο την αίσθηση πώς ήταν η ατμόσφαιρα σε εκείνες τις συναντήσεις πάνω στο 13ο.
Ναι, εκεί είναι τεταμένη. Εκεί είναι τεταμένη. Υπάρχει αγωνία για τις δύο πλευρές. Εμείς δεν έχουμε κάτι χειροπιαστό, δεν έχουμε κάτι που να δεσμεύει σε σχέση και με τη χρηματοδότηση. Αγωνιούμε για να πάρουμε κάτι τέτοιο. Δεν υπάρχουν πολύ μεγάλες προσδοκίες όμως πλέον σε εκείνη τη φάση.
The deal was that close, and we got the creditors to move so far. There was also the money of their taxpayers. I think it was unreasonable not to try to bridge the last remaining 380 million. I remember discussions between Jean-Claude Juncker and Alexis Tsipras about the taxation of the Greek ship owners, for example.
Because I had read in the papers that he was a communist, and I'm a Christian Democrat, so I was surprised that when I was asking him to tax ship owners at the richer part of the Greek society, that he refused. And I remember having said to him, so you are from the left, I'm from the right, okay.
Pensions or ship owners? I think for Juncker this was a foregone conclusion. He said, come on, you're from the left, from the political left, tax the ship owners and not take away something from the pensions. This was the kind of discussion. We're speaking about 380 million over the time horizon of this program. I think that was possible to bridge it.
Πολλοί περιγράφουν εκείνες τις ώρες τον Έλληνα Πρωθυπουργό να έχει μια μεγάλη αμφισημία. Ότι ενώ φαίνονταν συμφωνεί στο τραπέζι με τους θεσμούς, να βγαίνει έξω να μιλάει με τους συνεργάτες και να επιστρέφει με διαφορετική στάση.
Ναι, αυτό δεν ήταν εντύπωση, ήταν πραγματικότητα. Γιατί η εμπλοκή του στις συζητήσεις των Βρυξελών αναπόφευκτα δημιουργούσε και κάποιες υποχρεώσεις λογοδοσίας στην Αθήνα. Στη Βουλή, στο δημόσιο διάλογο. Εντάξει, όλοι ξέρουμε από πολιτική, αλλά και στην πολιτική υπάρχουν κάποια όρια στο τι λες για το ίδιο θέμα σε διαφορετικά ακροατήρια.
You mentioned the 400 million. Why couldn't the creditors give in a little bit more and get this through the finish line?
I think the understanding was not that they have to give in more, because they had also domestic political politics.
Τον Juncker πώς θα τον περιγράφατε?
Ειλικρινής σε εκείνη τη φάση σε σχέση με την αγωνία του. Δηλαδή δεν είχε σχέσεις απόστασης από την υπόθεση. Το βίωνε με πολύ μεγάλη αγωνία και ανθρώπινα. Αλλά έβλεπες ότι στο τραπέζι δεν νοιάζονται με τον ίδιο τρόπο όλοι. Αυτός νομίζω νοιαζόταν περισσότερο από όλους. Για να προκύψει λύση, έτσι. Βιώσιμη. Όχι λύση που να τσακίζει την Ελλάδα ή την κυβέρνησή της, να ταπεινώνει έναν λαό.
At the end of this discussion, how close are the two sides to a deal?
I think Tsipras had understood that we had gone as far as possible into his direction to make it acceptable to him, that this is probably, and I think some of his advisors told him, the best possible deal he could get. I think, as always, and that is one of the difficulties, you can negotiate something that is acceptable to you, but how do you explain it at home?
Οι Ευρωπαίοι θεωρούν ακριβώς αντίθετο. Θεωρούν ότι σε εκείνες τις συναντήσεις πάνω στο 13ο όροφο είσαστε πάρα πολύ κοντά, ότι είναι μερικά μικρά θέματα τα οποία πρέπει να λυθούν.
Δεν είμαι πολύ σίγουρος.
Είναι
δηλαδή,
εντυπωσιακό που έχετε τελείωσει αυτό.
Ναι, γιατί ξέρεις, εδώ είναι μάλλον ένα σύμπτωμα, δηλαδή το πώς αποτιμάει εκείνη τη στιγμή.
Όχι, και εκεί θυμάμαι το ρεπορτάζ. Θυμάμαι ότι θεωρούσαν οι Ευρωπαίοι ότι είμαστε πολύ κοντά.
Αυτό λέω. Αυτό όμως, το πώς παρουσιάζει ο καθένας τα αποτελέσματα μιας συζήτησης, είναι μέσα από τις δικές του προτεραιότητες και το δικό του μεγεθυντικό φακό, έτσι δεν είναι?
Άρα θεωρείτε ότι ήταν τεράστια απόκλησή σας?
Θεωρώ ότι δεν υπήρχε εκεί δυνατότητα να... Δεν διαφάνηκε δηλαδή μια δυνατότητα να βρεθεί λύση.
The package that was put to Greece was tough, but it was certainly no tougher than what the commitments under the previous program. Some additional fiscal action was needed, but that was due to the fact that that because of their policies, because of their confrontational approach, the economic situation had deteriorated.
Δεν νομίζω ότι υπήρχε υπουργός οικονομικών, κυβέρνηση, πρωθυπουργός που θα δεχόταν αυτή τη συμφωνία του Juncker.
Μου κάνει εντύπωση αυτό που λέτε, γιατί από τη μεριά των Ευρωπαίων τουλάχιστον αυτοί θα σας λέγανε ότι ήσασταν πολύ κοντά σε συμφωνία λίγο πριν φτάσουμε εκεί και ότι αυτή η συμφωνία αποτύπωνε σε ένα μεγάλο βαθμό αυτά που είχαν συζητηθεί.
Όχι, δεν αποτύπωνε πολλά πράγματα που είχαμε συμφωνήσει και σε πολλά πράγματα πήγανε και πίσω από αυτά που είχαμε συμφωνήσει. Ήταν φτιαγμένο, αυτή είναι η άποψή μου, εμένα με ρωτάτε, εγώ νομίζω ότι όποιος έγραψε αυτό το κείμενο, το έγραψε γιατί ήξερε ότι η ελληνική κυβέρνηση δεν θα το δεχθεί.
Και τι θα κερδίζανε?
Κερδίζανε ότι θα γινόταν αναστάτωση στην Ελλάδα, να έπεφτε μια κυβέρνηση της αριστεράς και άρα θα έλεγαν στους Ισπανούς και στους Πορτογάλους μη ψηφίζετε Μπλόκο και Ποδέμος, θα δείτε τι θα πάθετε. Η γραμμή ήταν να έχουν μια μεγάλη πολιτική ήττα η πρώτη φορά αριστερά.
But in the end, this flip-flopping got rid of all the trust that people had in Alexis Tsipras, which they did have because, as a person, I think he had a nice and pleasing and pleasant personality. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid that Black Friday on the 13th floor of the Berlaymont was a good example of that. Then he left the room and went to see other people. And then he changed his mind, or saw that it was politically impossible. And off they went, never to be seen again.
Breaking news out of Greece. Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has called for a referendum.
If you're going to do something like that, you would be wise to discuss it with your partners first.
Δεν θα ζητήσουμε στη χώρα που γεννήθηκε η δημοκρατία την άδεια από τον κύριο Σόιμπλε και τον κύριο Ντάιζεμπλουμ για να δώσουμε το λόγο στον ελληνικό λαό.
I was very angry. For him it was a domestic issue, for us it was a European one.
Αισθάνθηκα λοιπόν ανακούφιση ότι θα αποφασίσει ο λαός.
Το Υπουργικό Συμβούλιο πάγωσε.
Φοβάμαι ότι δεν θα είναι κατανοητό το νόημα του δημοψηφίσματος.
Well, the question was a lie, wasn't it? People were fooled.
Is this a sad day for you? A hard day for Europe.
Good luck to you.
Θέλει να τσακίσουν την κυβέρνησή μας.
Πρέπει να πάμε σε κλείσιμο τραπεζών και capital controls. Φοβόμαστε αιματοχυσία.
Το πραγματικό δειλό ήταν μέσα ή έξω από το ευρώ.
This is the end, my friend.